Uncertainty. It's an uncomfortable word. It's often an uncomfortable word. It feels particularly uncomfortable right now given what's hanging over our heads. But as is the case with us, as when we hear that word and we squirm a little, we feel a little uneasy, our teacher Moses was not entirely comfortable with uncertainty either. When he first meets God at the burning bush, he wonders, when I come to the Israelites and when I say to them, you know that the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, you know, what's his name? What's God's name? What am I supposed to say to them? Moses doesn't know God at all at this juncture and is concerned about how he can possibly represent God to the Israelites with so little understanding of who God is. In that moment, a few weeks ago, in the beginning of the book of Shemot, God responds to Moses, Eyeh asher eyeh. Essentially, I will be who I will be. God's answer is strange. It's evasive. Does it mean that God will be what each of us allows God to be in our lives? Does it mean that God, too, changes like we do? That would have been a totally revolutionary concept. The medieval rationalists would have not been interested in that, but maybe that's a possibility. Could it mean something else altogether? We can't know. And yet, at the time, Moses accepts the uncertainty, at least for a while. He moves forward. He helps shepherd the Israelites out of Egypt as God's prophet. Then we fast forward. We fast forward past the plagues. We fast forward past the splitting of the sea. We fast forward past Revelation at Mount Sinai. And we get to this week's Parashat. We get to Tisa, where the Israelites make a devastating mistake. They build the golden calf. They build the Egel HaZahav in Moses' absence while he's on top of Sinai. God prepares to destroy the people altogether, but Moses intercedes. Ultimately, a plague wipes out those responsible for the sin of the calf, but leaves the rest of the people intact to move forward towards their ultimate destination, though they don't know where it is yet, but ultimately to the destination of Canaan. Now, one would think that at this point, Moses would have breathed a sigh of relief. He'd be grateful that his people were largely forgiven and spared, and he'd be ready to continue carrying that mantle of leadership and serving as the go-between for God and Israel. However, Moses instead asks God for something more. He says, God, you've told me to lead this people forward. You've told me you selected me individually, singly to lead, and that I've gained your favor. So if that's the case, Hareini na kvodecha, let me know your ways, and that I may know you and continue in your favor. It seems like a fair request on the face of it, right? After all Moses has done to this point, he would seem entitled to know maybe a little more about this hidden God. How can he continue to be so devoted to God without a deeper, two-way, and more open relationship? And God seems about ready to grant Moses' requests until that actual phrase comes out, Hareini na ekvodecha. Oh, let me behold your presence. And to this, God responds that Moses can see what God does in the world, God's grace and compassion, but he can't see God's face. For lo yirani ha'adam b'chai, man cannot see my face and live. So how do we interpret this statement? It could mean Moses will actually die if he were to see God's face. But it could also mean that were Moses to actually behold God's true nature, to fully and totally understand who God is, he would no longer be able to be human. Because a foundational component of being human is for us to not know everything we need or want to know, and for us to somehow accept the reality of being in relationship with those and what we cannot fully understand. According to Rabbi Danny Gordis, the Midrash teaches us that to be human is, quote, to be suspended in uncomfortable equidistance between angels and animals. Animals do not wonder about God, and thus are not frustrated by their inability to comprehend, to make sense of the universe. Angels presumably know whatever they wish. We, however, share with the angels the desire to know. And with animals, we share a limitation. Like them, we will never comprehend the universe in which we live out our days. God in the Torah seemed to suggest that the challenge of being human is to learn to, quote, see the sacred in our not knowing and to discover in the vulnerability that comes with uncertainty the space in which we can uncover our potential greatness. Because it is in the moments of not knowing that we are the most human. When we discover how little we know about the world and that we can't just look up an answer or a solution, when we decide to face the unknowable together with others, to pursue sanctity in the face of uncertainty, that is when our humanity is on full display. God's response to Moses in this Parashat effectively is to tell Moses, you want to know, but you can't. If I were to allow you to know everything, you would no longer be human. A piece of your pure essence would be gone, just as when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil against God's express command. And in addition to humanity in general being threatened by the idea of having all the answers, knowing how everything works, Judaism particularly would also suffer irrevocable damage. Jewish life is at its core the way in which we bond as families, with close friends, as a community, and as a Jewish people, and face uncertainty together. Celebration and mourning, teaching and learning, praying and singing, arguing and agreeing. Not because we think we can dispel our inability to know, but because when we actually face that inability to know, we also come face to face with the scary idea of being truly vulnerable and are left with the one thing we do know. We need to find each other, we need to love each other, and to work to create lives of meaning together. In not knowing, we learn how to believe. In not knowing, we don't just see limits, but instead we also find potential and wonder and grandeur, and together we make the most of our often challenging world. And this week, we find ourselves right smack in the middle of a moment that is more uncertain than I would imagine most of us can remember. As I'm speaking, I'm looking around at a sanctuary that is only 3% full because we've actually told people not to come to shul. One of the issues that Clay Kodesh and lay leaders of our congregation most obsess over is how to put more people in the pews. And here we are literally telling people to stay home or we'll gently turn you away at the door for the sake of everyone's health. Hard to imagine, isn't it? And yet, how many of us in the room or watching us online this morning, watching from their homes, could have imagined even earlier this week that the NCAA March Madness tournament would be canceled, that the major professional sports would suspend their seasons, that Broadway would go dark, that Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson and Justin Trudeau's wife would all be infected, that Disneyland and Disney World would shut down, that the stock market would tumble precipitously, and the list goes on and on. One by one, communal events around us have been canceled, and schools have shut down or extended spring breaks. The anticipated spread of the virus has affected life cycle events on both the mourning and the joyous ends of the spectrum, forcing funerals in the coming days to be held only at graveside, and forcing grieving congregants to avoid having Shiva Minyanim in their own homes, and compelling a wedding family in a particularly difficult and poignant moment to come into my office this week to seek a heartbreaking answer they already knew for themselves. Should they effectively cancel their daughter's long-dreamed-of wedding celebration scheduled for early April in the name of the greater good? So much has changed, even in a matter of days, waking us up to one thing which is becoming certain. The coronavirus is no longer something we can avoid dealing with proactively. The normalcy and predictability of our lives has been dramatically and profoundly upended. We don't really know for how long either. And worst of all, when the hallmark of community and humanity and Jewish community in general, and Jewish community in particular, is about coming together to face uncertainty and challenges, the coronavirus outbreak response protocols demand that we maintain social distancing, a phrase which most of us probably never used in a sentence until recently, and now it's one of the phrases we probably read or hear most every day. We're not supposed to be too near people if we can avoid it. Our default gestures of emotional and physical closeness, the handshakes, the high fives, the hugs, the kisses, all of those things are off the table right now. So if we're not supposed to have physical contact with each other, let alone even sit near each other or be in a room together, how do we bond? How do we support each other through these unsettling and traumatic times? I'd like to share one important insight on this from my cousin, Rabbi Yosef Kanevsky of B'nai David Judea Congregation in Los Angeles, in a piece that was included in an article in yesterday's Washington Post. Addressing that term social distancing, Rav Yosef commented that, "I'd humbly suggest, though, that we use the term itself sparingly, if at all. Language is a powerful shaper of thinking, and the very last thing we need right now is a mindset of mutual distancing. We actually need to be thinking in the exact opposite way. Every hand that we don't shake must become a phone call that we place. Every embrace that we avoid must become a verbal expression of warmth and concern. Every inch and every foot that we physically place between ourselves and another must become a thought as to how we might be of help to that other should the need arise. It is obvious that distancing, if misplaced or misunderstood, will take its toll not only upon our community and our society's strength and resiliency, but upon the very integrity and meaning of our spiritual commitment. And, in the words of Mordechai to Esther that we read in the Megillah earlier this week, back when 400 people filled this sanctuary, who knows if it was for this time, for this moment, that we have committed ourselves to walk in God's ways. Uncertainty and limits to our knowledge is something God wanted us to accept, and something Rabbi Danny Gordis suggests God intended to be a tool to bring us together in an unbreakable bond of solidarity as we navigate that very uncertainty. As my cousin Rav Yosef Kanevsky points out, we can't let physical distance get in the way of affirming and reaffirming that absolutely critical bond of human relationship. Yesterday, I was on a call with Mayor Johnson and 70 local faith leaders just a few hours after a call with the rabbis from our Rabbinic Association of Greater Dallas. You should know that we are in lockstep with other faith communities locally, as we have chosen to limit as much as possible physical interaction between people. But we are also on the same page with so many other concerned congregations and folks around Dallas, and no doubt across the country and around the world, when we say that we need to do everything we can to overcome that physical distance and separation and find ways, old and new, to help people feel like they are not alone in their anxiety and worry and fear and uncertainty. Yes, we are sharing the weightiness of the situation, but we're also sharing the support and comfort. And in that togetherness, we will at some point emerge from this seemingly dark an unending and twisty tunnel and into the light. May God continue to send healing to all those who are ailing, skill and wisdom to those who tend to them, and strength and patience to their loved ones who sit by their sides while they recover. And may we be vigilant in doing our part and leading by example to prevent this disease from affecting more lives in the future. There may be a lot about this we don't know, but we do know that our choices and our actions will make a difference. Shabbat Shalom.